Julian hadn't been home in over 2 years, not since the night he told his parents he was gay. Not since they told him in those exact words, "If you walk out that door with him, don't come back." And yet here he was now, standing on the porch of his childhood home, his 7-year-old son Mason clutching his hand, his heart pounding like it used to during school fire drills. Inside, he could hear the clatter of plates, the soft hum of old Sinatra, and the laughter that sounded a little too rehearsed. It was his father's 60th birthday. The invitation had arrived weeks ago in the mail. No apology, no explanation, just an embossed card with cursive letters that read, "Family means forever." Julian had almost laughed when he read it, but it was Mason who wanted to come. "I want to meet Grandpa," the boy had said. "He's still your dad, right?" So Julian came, not for forgiveness, he wasn't asking for that anymore, but because Mason deserved to see where his father came from, even if that place never accepted who his father had become. The door creaked open before he could knock. Valerie, his mother, stood in the doorway, perfectly composed in her pearl necklace and too tight smile. "You actually came," she said. Not a hello, not a hug, just a judgment masquerading as surprise. Julian forced a smile. "This is Mason," he said, softly, giving his son's hand a little squeeze. She glanced at the boy with a flicker of something unreadable. "You can sit in the back. We're already a bit full." Inside, the table was set for 12. Julian's brother and sister were there with their spouses and kids, and at the far end, next to the kitchen door, and directly beside the stainless steel trash bin, sat a folding chair, just slightly lower than the others. No cushion, no place card, just the faint smell of Lysol and old casserole. Valerie motioned toward it. "Thought you'd want to be near the kitchen," she said with a tight smile. "Easier with the child." Julian blinked. The child, not Mason, not your son. And that seat, it wasn't an oversight, it was a message. He sat down anyway because Mason was watching, always watching, and Julian wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Not yet. The dinner began with shallow small talk and second-hand compliments. Nobody asked Julian how he'd been. Nobody acknowledged Mason except for Grandpa Ernest, who raised a trembling hand and said, "Good to see you, son." And that was it. Until Valerie, with a slice of turkey on her plate and venom on her tongue, said, "It's nice to have you here, Julian. Even if, symbolically." He looked up. Symbolically. She smiled like she'd rehearsed it. "Well, you know what they say, you put what's broken nearer the trash, just easier to clean up after." His fork clattered against his plate. The room went still. Nobody said a word. Not his siblings, not their spouses, not even his father, who sipped his wine like it was water. Julian's vision blurred. But he didn't cry. He wouldn't cry. Then he felt it. A small, trembling hand slipping into his own. It was Mason. His son looked up at him with those defiant eyes and said, not loudly but loud enough, "You told me trash gets taken out, but you're still here, Papa, so maybe they're the trash." Silence. Pure, sharp silence. And in that moment, Julian didn't feel broken. He felt seen, not by the people who pushed him away, but by the one person who truly mattered. If you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong, even by your own family, stay with us. Julian's story is just beginning. Like, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to Heart Stories for more powerful, real-life moments. Julian tried to stay invisible, smile politely, cut the chicken, pass the salt. The chatter around the table swirled with forced cheerfulness and veiled judgment, like tinsel over barbed wire. But the real blow came halfway through dinner. "Isn't it nice," his mother Linda said loudly, pausing to sip her wine, "how Julian always finds his way back to us, especially when someone else is paying for dinner." A couple of weak chuckles followed. Julian blinked, not quite sure he heard her right. Then came the second strike. "I mean," she added, gesturing vaguely toward him, "you get used to being on the outside. You live with that kind of life." She said that kind like she was spitting something bitter. "And you forget what family structure even means." Julian's fork froze midair. Across the table, his brother-in-law Rick raised an eyebrow and chimed in, "You still calling that boyfriend of yours a partner?" I thought only real couples use that word. More laughter, this time bolder. Crueler. Julian clenched his jaw and forced the bite into his mouth, chewing slowly. He didn't trust his voice not to crack. Not yet, but the room wasn't done. Do you even think you can be a role model to a child, Julian? Rick leaned forward now, elbows on the table. I mean, what kind of example are you really setting? Julian opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked down at his plate again, where his peas were now just green mush beneath the pressure of his knife. Across from him, his son Mason sat quiet, his little hands balled into fists in his lap. Julian knew that look. He'd worn it once at that very table. And then Mason stood. Nobody noticed him at first, not until he climbed onto his chair, cleared his throat, and placed a piece of folded construction paper right in the center of the table. Everyone paused. The paper unfolded into a colorful drawing, two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow sky. One tall, one small. And in big block letters across the top, "My dad teaches me how to love." Mason's voice trembled but didn't falter. "You keep calling him broken, but he's the only one who showed me what love looks like." Silence. Dead, suffocating silence. Julian stared at his son, eyes stinging. Across the table, someone set down their fork a little too hard. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Linda reached for her wine again. Julian stood slowly, placing his napkin on the table. "Mason," he said gently, "let's go." Rick scoffed. "So that's it? You run away again?" Julian turned, calm and cutting. "No, I'm protecting my son from people who mistake cruelty for tradition." He took Mason's hand and walked out without another word. Behind him, the silence wasn't just awkward, it was shattered. For a brief moment, Julian allowed himself to breathe. The storm at the family dinner had passed, or so it seemed. He and Mason had spent the evening curled up on their worn living room couch, watching old cartoons and eating leftover birthday cake that Grandpa Ernie had quietly slipped into Mason's hands before they left. There was comfort in that quiet, in the glow of their little apartment. Julian even thought maybe this was a turning point, but the next morning shattered that illusion. His phone buzzes just after 9 o'clock a.m. An unknown number. He hesitated, then opened the message. "Remember that college party at Briar Hall? The one where you could barely stand? Guess who still has the tape?" Attached was a still frame, blurry but unmistakable. Julian, 19, drunk, disheveled, slurring into someone's shoulder as he stumbled out of a frat house. His eyes were half closed, his shirt stained with beer. A younger version of himself, foolish and lost. Julian's blood went cold. A second message followed. "Stay out of the family. Keep the kid away from Grandpa, or I share this with everyone." His hands shook as he read the message again. Then a third message arrived, this time with a name attached. Victor. Victor, of course. Julian hadn't seen his cousin in nearly a year. Not since the last family holiday where Victor spent most of the evening loudly complaining about people like Julian making everything about themselves. He'd always been that way, arrogant, petty, desperate for attention, and furious when he didn't get it. As kids, Victor had made Julian's life a slow burn of cruelty. Whispered slurs, mocking the way he spoke, calling him little girl in front of the other boys, and once stuffing his sketchbook into the toilet just to see him cry. Julian had long believed those days were behind them. Apparently not. He paced the kitchen floor, clutching the phone. The video was old, fuzzy, nothing criminal, but bad enough, embarrassing enough, and in the hands of someone like Victor, it could be devastating. And then he understood why. The timing, the recent dinner, the tension over Grandpa Ernie. Julian had heard whispers that Grandpa was rewriting his will, that he wanted to leave a large portion of his estate not to Linda or Cyrus or Victor, but to the only family member who had shown him real warmth in the last few years, to Julian. And not just because he was kind or steady, but because Julian was building something. A family, with Mason. Victor had always imagined himself as the rightful heir, the golden grandson. He visited only when convenient, took selfies with Grandpa for social media, and spent more time bragging about the family name than honoring it. But now Julian was the one being called son again. The one Grandpa had invited to Sunday breakfast. The one Mason had drawn into a crayon portrait and taped to Grandpa's fridge. Julian sat down slowly, his knees weak. The message was clear. disappear, or be humiliated. He opened the photo again. His own face stared back, young, ashamed, vulnerable, and yet real. He remembered that night, the loneliness, the confusion. That was the night he almost confessed his sexuality to a friend, then backed out. The night he drank too much because he didn't know who he was allowed to become. It wasn't just a tape, it was a wound. He stared at the screen for a long time, then tapped on his screen and called the only person who knew the full version of that night. Devin, his ex, the one who'd been with him at the party, the one who'd helped him stumble home, who'd stayed up that night to make sure Julian didn't choke in his sleep. They hadn't spoken in over a year, not since the split, but when Devin picked up, his voice was soft, cautious. "Julian, I think Victor's trying to blackmail me." A pause. "With the video?" Julian exhaled. "You knew he had it?" "I saw him filming that night. I yelled at him to stop. He laughed and said, 'Just making memories.' I should have done more." Julian leaned his forehead against the wall. "He's threatening to post it, unless I walk away from Grandpa, from Mason." There was silence again. Then Devin said, "You know what I remember most about that night?" "What?" "You were the drunkest I'd ever seen you, but you kept asking me the same thing over and over." Julian closed his eyes. "What did I ask?" Devin's voice softened. "You asked, do you think I could ever be a good dad?" Julian's throat tightened. The memory came rushing back. How afraid he'd been to imagine a future with love, with family. How foreign the word father had felt. Until Mason. "I think you have your answer now," Devin said. Julian didn't reply. Later that night, after Mason fell asleep with his stuffed lion tucked under one arm, Julian sat at his kitchen table, staring at Victor's messages again. Then he opened his phone and started typing. "Post it if you want. That kid in the video is gone. The man I am now, he builds forts on weekends, packs school lunches, and tucks his son in with stories about courage. You can't shame someone who's already stepped into their truth." He hit send, blocked the number, then leaned back, heart pounding, but light. Let Victor do what he would. Julian wasn't playing scared anymore. He had too much to protect, too much to live for, too much to be proud of. And nothing, especially not a dusty old video, was going to undo that. Julian didn't reply to Victor's last threat. He didn't need to. That evening, while Mason was doing homework at the kitchen table, Julian drove across town to the quiet retirement villa where his grandfather now lived. The man who once commanded boardrooms now tended to roses and kept handwritten journals. When Julian arrived, the old man was pruning a withered branch, eyes squinting in the late afternoon sun. "I figured you'd come," his grandfather said without turning. "You always do when you're carrying something too heavy to say out loud." Julian didn't know where to begin, so he just sat down beside the garden bench and let it spill out. The insults at the dinner, the cruel video threat, the way Victor tried to erase Mason's presence from the family narrative. Every word came out raw but steady. His grandfather listened, silent and unmoving. Then he stood, walked back into the house, and returned with a small wooden box. Inside it was a letter creased, folded neatly, the ink faded in places. "I wrote this after I met Mason," he said, handing it to Julian. "I didn't know when you'd need it. I guess now I do." Julian unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unmistakable. To Julian, the world may try to shame you for who you are. Some may call you broken, others may call you unworthy, but I have never seen anyone carry truth with as much grace as you do. You chose love when the world gave you fear. You raised a child not from your blood, but from your heart. That is more honorable than any name on a family tree. You have lived with more courage and integrity than most of us ever dared to. I'm proud of you, not in spite of who you are, but because of it." Julian couldn't speak. His throat tightened around the words that tried to surface. His grandfather reached out, placing a weathered hand on Julian's shoulder. "You're not the one who should feel ashamed. Let me remind them of that." 2 weeks later, the old man hosted a private garden gathering, his idea. "It's time we rewrite the script," he told Julian. Invitations went out quietly, but intentionally. The setting was intimate, twinkling lights strung between trees, a buffet table filled with dishes Julian used to cook as a child, and chairs arranged in a circle. No hierarchy, No assigned seating, no symbolic trash cans. Julian was the guest of honor, and he didn't need to wear a mask this time. He arrived in a soft navy shirt, holding Mason's hand, and this time, no one looked away. There was no toast from the patriarch. Instead, it was Mason, barely 10 years old, who stood before the gathering, holding a piece of paper in his small hands. "Hi," he said, voice wavering but strong. "I know most of you don't see me as family. Maybe because I don't look like anyone here. Maybe because I don't share the same last name. But love doesn't need blood. It needs kindness. And my dad gives me that every single day. He taught me how to ride a bike, how to be brave, how to say sorry when you're wrong. If that's what broken looks like, then I don't want perfect." A hush fell over the crowd. Some glanced at Julian, some looked down at their shoes. Even Valerie, Julian's mother, sat frozen, wine glass untouched for once. "And one more thing," Mason added, eyes locking with her. "If you think sitting someone next to the trash can makes them less, it says more about your heart than it ever will about theirs." Julian had never been more still, or more proud. The applause wasn't loud. It wasn't performative. It was the kind that echoed deeper, measured, thoughtful, real. And for the first time in years, Julian felt seen. The garden had begun to dim, the sky melting into golden hues when Julian's grandfather slowly rose from his seat. The murmurs died down almost instantly. Everyone, even Victor, knew that when the old man spoke, you listened. He stood with purpose, cane in one hand, a small wooden box in the other. "I want to thank you all for being here," he began, voice worn but unwavering. "Tonight wasn't just about a meal, it was about legacy, and not the kind that fits neatly on a family tree." He opened the box and pulled out a stack of envelopes, passing them down the line with help from one of the cousins. "Inside each envelope," he said, "is a photograph I chose for each of you, a memory, a reminder, something that speaks to who you are, or maybe who you've forgotten to be." The rustling of paper followed, the sound of decades unfolding in people's hands. Some smiled quietly, others furrowed brows at forgotten moments. But then he turned to Julian, and from a separate envelope, he pulled out a photo already framed. It was larger, heavier, meant to be seen. He held it up for all to see, a candid shot of Julian and Mason at the local children's center. Julian's face was turned toward his son, eyes crinkled with laughter, as Mason leaned into him mid-laugh, cheeks full of joy. The moment was pure, unstaged, real. "This," the grandfather said, holding the frame with both hands, "is the picture I want on my mantle when I'm gone. This is the kind of love that outlives us all." He walked slowly to the center of the long garden table and placed the frame there, right in the middle where no one could ignore it. "I've spent too many years mistaking bloodlines for bonds," he continued. "But tonight, I'm giving my name and everything that comes with it to the one man at this table who showed what family truly means. Not out of duty, not out of tradition, but out of heart." He looked directly at Julian, then at Mason. "My legacy goes to you." Silence hung in the air like fog. For a moment, no one moved, not even Victor, whose fists had clenched beneath the tablecloth. His face betrayed nothing, but the way he sat, rigid, unblinking, spoke volumes. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He didn't dare. Julian didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply reached over, took Mason's hand, and smiled, soft and steady. It wasn't victory. It was validation. And it was enough. From the far end of the table, his mother stood up quietly. She didn't make a scene. She didn't say a word, just pushed her chair back and walked away, heels clicking against the stone path, until they disappeared beyond the hedges. No one stopped her. Julian watched her go, but his hand never let go of Mason's. And Mason, ever aware, ever intuitive, leaned over and whispered, "You don't have to be loud to be strong." Julian nodded. That was the moment he realized he hadn't come here to win. He'd come to heal. And somehow he had. Later that night, as the last candles burned low, Julian found himself alone by the photo frame. He stared at it for a while, then looked down at Mason playing with the dog near the rose bushes. He didn't need a surname to feel like a father. He didn't need an apology to feel whole. He had everything he came for, and everything they tried to take away from him. Dignity, love, belonging. He had rebuilt on his own. Have you ever been told you didn't belong, only to prove quietly that you did all along? Tell us your story in the comments, like if this moved you, and subscribe to never miss a story that speaks your truth. Let's keep building a world where love